Hi, I'm Rachel Arthur. Thanks so much to AIMA for inviting me to contribute an update on the presentation I gave last year at the wonderful AIMA conference. I talked about the power and place of integrative medicine, certainly from a naturopath's perspective, but I think from a lot of us who work within this field of health. So I'm giving an update. What have we learned in the last 12 months? Well, quite a bit. It seems that while we've had a fair bit of lockdown, a lot of people have been very productive with that lockdown and generated a lot of new data that has finally come to publication. Some of this helps us to become more clear about who comes to see and engages with practitioners that work under an integrative medicine model. One of the myths that's really been blown apart is the notion that kind of already the converted would come to see us, that the majority of people may have been brought up in a family or a household that had alternative health paradigms at play, but that's actually been shown not to be the case. Perhaps it was in the past, but not anymore. And what we are increasingly finding, and I spoke to this last year based on McIntyre and colleagues' work, is that our new normal patient is getting increasingly younger. And rather than it being that they come from alternative kind of thinking parents and households, really McIntyre and colleagues put forward the argument that really there is a normalization of what was historically alternative medicines. And they found a very large proportion of individuals in their 20s were coming to consult with naturopaths and herbalists. One of the other really big myths is that we preach to the converted, that we see the already reformed, that we see the worried well, and we're there to, give the privileged even greater well-being. This, again, thanks to McIntyre and colleagues' work, has really been debunked. In fact, they were looking at the proportion of patients who did visit naturopaths and herbalists in the previous 12 months, and they found that the dominant group actually had diagnosed chronic health conditions. And in fact, just 26% didn't have any of these. What I found really interesting was there was a particular quite significant contribution of about 16%, something like that, of patients. They were our fourth biggest group who came to see us, and they had 5 or more chronic conditions. Really puts paid to that idea that we see the worried well. We have heard over and over again why people would choose a complementary medicine or an integrative health path, and we've heard them enough that we can repeat it like a mantra. But again, we're now having the opportunity to really retest kind of these old findings and say, do they still hold true in a contemporary clientele? So holistic beliefs and the perception that complementary medicine is safe, all of those sorts of things, do certainly have merit still. But with new data coming out, particularly the fabulous work of Foley and colleagues in 2020, we now know that dissatisfaction with conventional medicine is not such a strong motivator as perhaps it had been previously purported to be. Their work, where they looked at a very large number of different complementary medicine practitioners, osteopaths, acupuncturists, massage therapists, naturopaths, and GPs, and they looked at patients' experiences of seeing these practitioners when they suffered from chronic health conditions. And the patients reported that certainly 51% of them strongly agreed that dissatisfaction with conventional medicine was a motivator for them. But in fact, 70% sought out complementary medicine practitioners to improve the efficacy of their conventional approaches, and another 38% to reduce their side effects. I appreciate hearing these concrete data so much. It adds to McIntyre's findings, the previous study, where they found that 82% of patients who consulted with a complementary medicine practitioner were using prescription medications. It was no different in terms of the frequency of use. And I think this really speaks volumes about we are at this place where it's not one medicine or the other. It is truly integrative medicine. The other thing that Foley and colleagues were able to document more clearly than has been done before are these last two values or perceptions of values of our patients. And that was that they, in addition to some of these other motivators, really do believe and feel that practitioners from an integrative medicine background provide hope and control. And in addition to that, that they are particularly supportive as health professionals. In fact, when they looked at survey responses to all of these motivators and many more, they found that these two perceptions of practitioner support and that they could offer patients hope and control were actually the strongest reasons patients reported for coming to see us, and one of the key things that they reported as an experience of having seen us. So 97% rated this as being the top response. Second on the list is that complementary medicine is safe. That's good. And third on the list is the old holistic beliefs. So how do we meet these needs? Because as I said, from Foley's study that she published in 2020, there were comparisons, direct comparisons also with patients' experiences of consulting with a GP. And there was no doubt that if we were looking at a conventional GP, that the experiences were very different, not nearly as empowering, of course. So how do we as complementary medicine or integrative health practitioners meet these needs? What's the magic in our medicine? Well, some things are not that mysterious to work out. We know that we spend a larger amount of time per appointment with patients, and we know that there is enormous value in this from the patient perspective. We also know that there's another element of time here, and that is time, ongoing. So a series of appointments and the continuity of care that we offer, the establishment and deepening of the therapeutic relationship, which of course is not so readily available within the conventional medical kind of structure framework currently. The other elements that were really picked up on in this work found that we were able, as complementary medicine or integrative health practitioners, to really deliver on the core tenets of patient-centered care. Things like patient activation, delivery and practice, problem solving and contextual counselling, follow-up and coordination, which of course is our advocacy role that we play very strongly. And of course, some of the other magic in our medicine and the way that we offer hope and control is through our lifestyle prescriptions. So it's not this disempowerment of take this thing in the bottle and there's nothing else that you can do. Obviously our prescriptions and our advice are eclectic, and they cover everything from, go to an art class to spend some more time in nature, but clearly deliver on these positive patient experiences. One of the other things that's starting to emerge as a bit of a narrative in the research, slowly, is the interesting diagnostic skills that integrative medicine and complementary medicine practitioners have. And often those diagnostic skills are a dualism. So they're using traditional Western medical diagnostics or conventional Western medical diagnostics, and also some traditional, more sort of naturopathic or oriental ones as well. I think no matter what the mix each practitioner is using, we are incredible at looking at the whole picture, gathering vast amounts of information and pulling it all together in the one place so that the value is fully realized. I think to illustrate this point and, more clearly, I'm going to introduce you to a patient. So this is 55-year-old oxidative stress Oksana. And she's slim, she's menopausal, she's not on any HRT. She is on a couple of medications, however, because she has absolutely drawn the short straw genetically. There are a multitude of very high cardiovascular risks within the family that she herself suffers from as well. She has familial hyperlipidemia, which she's medicated for, but it's only partially controlled. She also has an aneurysm that runs very strongly through the family that a parent and all the siblings, including herself, have required surgical correction for. She does have high blood pressure. On top of this, she's been a smoker for 30 years. But when she had that surgery for her aneurysm, she turned a whole new leaf over and decided to drop the smoking and really get on to looking after herself. Much to her disappointment, even though she stopped smoking and made a lot of other positive changes 12 months ago, she's really not feeling physically better. She suffers from fatigue, she suffers from a lot of GIT issues and an encroaching sort of sense that something's wrong. I'm sure we can appreciate Oksana is a very high risk individual, and that's from a medical perspective. They're all hands to the pump trying to mitigate that risk. But also when she comes to see us, we have that same perspective as well. When we pull together all her information, which was scattered all over the place from different labs and what have you, and look at it side by side, we can see that certainly based on the pathology company's reference intervals, there doesn't seem to be too much to be worried about, not too much red font or H's. But if we focus in on the GGT row just for a moment and we have a look at that, we can see that the upper limit of normal provided by the pathology company here, which has been determined in-house, this is not an independent objective marker of healthy GGT, is kind of part of the problem. It's telling us not to worry about these GGT values for her, bar one that gives us the big H. But if you've read anything about pathology and how it is a comparative process and how that comparative process can really lead you astray, I hope you've read this brilliant article by White and Kelly. First of all, the normal range, they say, is not normal and it's not a range. And they have a lot more to say in addition to that. We've all had this experience where we can see patients who are told that their values, their labs are all normal, but they feel atrocious. And we're left looking at them through a very different lens and drawing some very different conclusions. So let's have a look at the humble GGT so-called liver enzyme for a moment and think about what comparison or comparator we really should be using. The upper limit of normal from independent organisations like the RCPA, so not a private pathology company, that does reflect their clientele and therefore reflects their new sort of abnormal. But the upper limit of normal from an independent body really says that for women, GGT shouldn't be over 30. And we can see that the 95% of Australian women sit somewhere between 9 and 56. But wouldn't you know it, the research has been done, we can actually define optimal. So rather than looking at the ULN as just being a demarcation between those more or less likely to have hepatobiliary disease, there has been the research done to actually define what healthy looks like, because GGT is a ubiquitous enzyme, certainly not restricted to flagging, a gallbladder and liver issues. That research strongly suggests and has been echoed several times that adult women should not have a GGT over 19. If you find this incredulous, I encourage you to read Koenig and colleagues' work from 2015. They also go on to tell you how that reference range or ULN keeps sneaking up every decade. You can see in the 1970s, the median GGT for women was only 9. So why is it sneaking up? Why have we now got pathology companies telling us outrageous cutoff values that mean that we miss the whole meaning of the labs? Well, because we're reflecting the new abnormal. And GGT is a highly sensitive, non-specific marker within the liver enzyme. So it's not great at detecting liver problems, but it is like the German Shepherd of detecting oxidative stress problems anywhere in the body. We'll have a look at that in a moment. So going back to Oksana's labs, we've had a look at the GGT. We now apply the independent, scientific consensus about what it should look like if it was healthy. And we're left with a very different interpretation that there's really something going on here. If we go one step further and we go back into that White and Kelly paper, they make such a poignant point about even intra-individual shift, or not just even, but intra-individual shift, and the significance of that. So in this illustration here from that paper, they're saying, look, you might have a patient who goes from within the reference interval to another point within the reference interval, but if it is a significant shift for them away from their normal, this is likely to be highly meaningful. And so succinctly, they say normality is relative and situational. So if we go back and we look at Oksana one more time and we say, okay, we applied a healthy cutoff by Koenig of less than 19, that worried us for a start. And now let's look at comparing Oksana with herself. What do we see? Now we see that there is really a strong suggestion of increasing oxidative stress. And this is at odds with all that has gone on for her in the last 12 months. Stopping smoking does not resolve oxidative stress and inflammation the next day. We know, in fact, the inflammatory kind of footprint or watermark can stay around for up to a decade. But she's done a lot in addition to that would really make you think that this oxidative stress should be dropping down, if anything. And yet we're seeing the opposite pattern. This is obviously a clear call to action in this patient that, as we said, is incredibly high risk for cardiovascular disease. If you're not familiar with GGT outside of a hepatobiliary context, it's time to get familiar. So GGT is really a ubiquitous enzyme, as we said, expressed in just about every cell in the body, actually on the outer surface of the cell, because it works outside the cell at recycling glutathione. So this is it in action here. Some people think, well, how could more GGT be a problem if all it's doing is generating more glutathione to meet that demand being placed on the body? But in fact, it certainly is. And this is a beautiful illustration of the risk associated with high GGT from Endrapper and colleagues. They show that as GGT works on the regeneration of glutathione, it also, by the by, generates iron radicals. It generates also peroxidation reactions. And these are then central to the oxidation of LDLs, exactly what we don't want in Oksana, who still has high normal LDLs in spite of medication. So higher GGT is both a response to high oxidative stress, but also a driver or a perpetuator of it. And not to put too fine a point on it, but Ramnami and many, many others have certainly correlated GGT and other very routine labs with mortality. And we're not really surprised that GGT has one of the strongest predictive relationships with an increased odds ratio or hazard ratio of mortality, because of now what we appreciate is really signaling and the problem that ensues from high levels. So I think that there's so much that is the magic in our medicines, and we continue to offer that. I think partly it comes about from all of us in this field think outside the box. There's no doubt about it. We're trained in multiple modalities and we can offer all of those to our clients. We are deeply compassionate and empathic individuals. And boy, do we stand up and advocate for our patients. And let's face it, in a nutshell, we're in demand, and that demand is not diminishing anytime soon. Thanks so much.